Hello everybody and welcome back to another exciting edition of Chromatographic, the show in which I, Matt the Game Boy, take you through the highs and lows of the Game Boy Color library, one cart at a time. It's time to wrap up WayForward, of course, with Shantae. Imagine for a second it's June 2002. You're walking with your colleagues to lunch and you pass your local GameStop when, out of nowhere, a game box flies at you. You pick it up and you realise you're holding in your hands a physical copy of a game that you and your wife began to imagine 8 years earlier. A game you and your colleagues have been moonlighting on for years as you've developed licensed titles to keep the lights on. You're holding in your hands a title that publishers tried to change, that no one would back because of its expensive cartridge and unknown female protagonist. Then, when a distributor finally stepped in to manufacture it, a whole year and a half passed without a whisper of its existence. A year and a half in which a new handheld console had launched, and you and your team had already begun to make games for it. Finally, though, you're holding it in your hands. That day in June was a pretty special one for all at WayForward, but for Matt and Matt Bozon, Jimmy Huey and the rest of the WayForward Pocket team, it must have felt pretty damn good. What had started as an innocent conversation between Matt and Erin about the kind of video game she'd create if she had a chance was now a tangible thing. Erin's hair-whipping half-genie, surrounded by locations and characters created by her husband, was now in the world. In what is now considered to be the last hurrah for the Game Boy Color, Capcom, the game's distributor, got the game into stores by shipping it in the same retail cases as Resident Evil Gaiden. The critics adored it, but with even the game's developers not knowing it was hitting shelves, it's perhaps not surprising that Shantae's sales didn't really set the world on fire. But here's the thing. Financial success isn't the only metric by which art and culture are judged. Yes, it's important. After all, video games, like movies, music, and almost anything else we enjoy, are products of a business that's at least looking to recoup its investment. But in the broader sense, like a cult movie or a song for an obscure band, certain ideas survive because they mean so much to the people that do experience them, that they gain a cult following that refuses to let them fade into obscurity. Shantae for the Game Boy Color is one such game. The game is a story of a half-genie named Shantae, who's the guardian genie of a place called Scuttletown in the world of Sequinland. However, one day the town is attacked by the infamous pirate Risky Boots and a Tinkerbell army, who steal a prototype steam engine with untold power. Shantae learns that if Risky were to also collect the 4 elemental stones, she would be able to make an unstoppable weapon with which she could control the 7 seas. Determined to stop her, Shantae sets out to find the stones and save the day. This game is an action platformer that, like the other WayForward titles we've seen in this series, is a love letter to the 8-bit era and the games that came before it. There's elements of Mega Man, Castlevania, Metroid, and even Zelda 2 sprinkled into the game's design, but Shantae is most definitely its own game with unique mechanics that make it interesting. Shantae controls, as you might expect, with A to jump and B to whip her hair at enemies to attack. Every movement from our half-genie hero is beautifully animated, and the controls are so tight that it makes precision platforming a breeze in the later levels. On top of her hair whip for defeating enemies, however, Shantae learns on her journey abilities that allow her, through the magic of belly dancing, to transform into different animals that come with different abilities. A monkey to climb walls, an elephant to remove obstacles, a spider to climb the background, and a harpy to soar through the skies. If you happen to be lucky enough to own a physical cart, you can also purchase the Tinkerbell transformation later in the game, which combines the spider, the monkey, and the elephant into one form and makes things a hell of a lot easier. It's this Metroidvania-like exploration wrapped around this musical minigame that makes up the core of the game and is really a charming feature. At first, I found the minigame a little tedious, as having to press select and enter a button sequence into a failable minigame did make me raise an eyebrow. But WayForward was smart enough to make the animal transformations quick, 2-button maneuvers that are easy to remember, meaning switching between the forms becomes an act of muscle memory later in the game. That's not all Shantae's dancing can do, however, as later in the game you'll get access to other moves that allow you to teleport as well as to transform, sending you across the breadth of Sequinland with just a shake of the hips. Why is it important to teleport, you ask? Well, because Sequinland is absolutely massive. Each of the game's 4 towns, Scuttle, Oasis, Bandit and Watertown respectively, are separated by multiple huge areas full of enemies and platforming in order to reach your next location. While technically impressive that multiple platforming levels can sit between a single town, it is perhaps the biggest flaw in the game, as with its Metroidvania roots, you need to do a lot of backtracking between areas, not only to collect heart upgrades and secrets if you're that way inclined, but just simply to progress in the story. Seriously, it can take upwards of 15 minutes sometimes before you get the ability to fly to go between towns, and enemies only drop slithers of health and coin, so it doesn't even really feel that rewarding either. Add to this the fact you don't get an in-game map, so you can platform for 15 minutes only to reach the wrong area, which is a little frustrating to say the least. In stark contrast, the game's 4 dungeons are, while slightly labyrinthian, solidly crafted experiences. Like a good Zelda title, the dungeons offer puzzles for the player to solve that build on their understanding of the world. Instead of new equipment though, you gain the previously mentioned animal transformations in each dungeon, allowing the game to teach you through clever design how each power-up works, as well as its strengths and weaknesses. It's also why you gain the warp squids required to teleport across the map, and while some of these do require later backtracking with other animal forms, most are rewarded to the player for clever use of the form given in that dungeon. And of course, what would any good dungeon be without a big bad boss at the end to protect his elemental stone? These bosses are generally pretty fun and make the player use their new animal form in an interesting way. The sprite work of these bosses is of course gorgeous and expressive, as I'm sure you've already noticed, and that's probably Shantae's biggest win. It pushes the Game Boy Color in ways only late releases can, and if I'm being honest, in a way I'd argue perhaps even Nintendo didn't. There's fake parallax scrolling, transparencies, and almost every area of the game features some form of lighting effect that gives a depth to the environment and sprites that's rarely seen in 8-bit titles. The game also shifts between a side view for the platforming to an over-the-shoulder perspective in the towns, allowing you to explore them to save, buy items, play various minigames, and visit the game's colourful cast of characters. This is the thing that drops people's jaws about Shantae, how good it looks. As well as the Bozon's push for an expressive animation in the game, Jimmy Hebe was able to program the Game Boy to do things that really made the hardware sing. Of course, each graphical flourish or extra frame of animation has its cost. Bozon has stated multiple times that the game's enemies had to be designed around Shantae's abilities because of the Game Boy's scan lines, resulting in creatures that are stacked in odd ways to accommodate for the fact that Shantae is built over 12 sprites layered on top of each other. The fact you don't notice this while playing is a real testament to the design, as slowdown and tearing are very rare in Shantae. So you've got to tip your hat to the WayForward Pocket team for that at least. What's not so great though is the game's use of lives. As Shantae toes the line between platformer and Metroidvania, it borrows the idea from Link's adventure of having lives, and its handling of them doesn't make for a great experience if I'm honest. Every time you lose a life, either by taking hits from enemies or by instantly dying in spikes and pit traps, the player is kicked back to the beginning of an area. It wouldn't be so bad if areas weren't so long, but as it can take 5 minutes to get from one end of the screen to another, it adds up. Factor in the game's day and night cycle, making the game twice as hard to traverse in the dark a la Castlevania 2, and you've got the perfect recipe for throwing your Game Boy right there. Even worse though, if you do run out of lives, you won't just get a continue screen to kick you back to the start of the level or dungeon. Oh no, you're going back to the last save point you used. Matt Bozon has gone on to say that this feature was implemented late and he's not proud of the way it's handled, but it is a massive mark against the game, even if it's something that was fortunately fixed in later entries to the series. I do have a few more minor niggles with the game, the end boss fight being relatively easy to cheese if you've got the spider form, the fact that a lot of Shantae's abilities are locked behind item purchases, and the fact you need to backtrack through a lot of the game to attack in animal form really do feel a bit of a miss here, but it has to be said, I think these are just minor complaints from my side, and perhaps other people wouldn't feel so strongly about them. The game's music, it's also worth noting, was done by Jake Kaufman, who was doing similar trickery on the audio side to Huey's programming of the game's engine for visual effects. While his soundtrack for the original Shantae isn't as praised as his work on the later games, I really like a lot of the music he did for this game, with Escape from Tinkerbell Island and the boss theme really standing out to me. But the real question on your lips is this: is Shantae worth the insane price some people are willing to pay for a physical copy? That's an easy one. No. That's not a knock on Shantae, as despite it not being a perfect game, I really enjoyed my time with it, and I encourage you to check it out in the 3DS eShop if you're curious, where it's affordable. It's just that I don't think any game is worth the obscene amount of money even a cart-only copy of the game now demands. What people are paying for in this case isn't a game though, it's a cultural artifact. An admittedly rare game that acts as a demo not only for what the Game Boy Color was capable of, but for the potential of games as a medium to be built upon by passionate fans to make new and more exciting titles. Shantae is in essence an indie game in the truest sense of the word. Not only was it produced by a small, passionate team with a vision, but it says unashamedly, these are the things we love, we hope you like them too. Sequinland is a world full of wonderful characters and exotic locations that live on in the series' subsequent sequels that only exist because of the studio's belief in the franchise. It's a game that held bitmap aesthetics aloft as an art style in a world where the whole video game industry only saw it as a limitation and were desperately trying to get away from it with polygons and realistic textures. Shantae is a love letter to an era of gaming that it could have easily been the footnote to. It might not be that unicorn of a perfect game, but its shortcomings pale in comparison to what it represents. And that brings us to the end of another Chromatographic, ladies and gentlemen, and in fact to WayForward. I hope you've enjoyed this series. If you have, please let me know down in the comments below what you think of Shantae, and also a massive, massive thank you to all at WayForward for their help during this series. Have we seen the last of WayForward on this channel? Who knows? Too early to say. But either way, Game Boys and Girls, I'll be back next week with another look at another great title for the Game Boy. Until then though, be sure, as always, to game on.